Real Nerds is a proud partner of the Denver Podcast Network. In the shadow of the mountains,
we speak. Coming to you from the X-Axis, it's John of All Trades with your host, John X.
Welcome to this John of All Trades podcast promo. Each Wednesday, I bring you a brand new interview with someone fascinating and ask the question we all ask when we meet someone new. Hey, what do you do? It's fun, informative, and it's the 2017 Westward Reader's Choice Award winner for Best Denver Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, and johnofalltrades.us.
Oh, hi, podcast listeners. There's many ways you can listen to the Real Nerds podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes. You can also subscribe on Stitcher Radio. You want to send us a Twitter message? You can do that. It's so easy, at Real Nerds. Like us on Facebook, Real Nerds Podcast. You can visit our website, realnerdspodcast.com, where there'll be a lot of articles for you to not only read, but to listen to our previous shows. You can also call us, 720-6nerds5. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Jeanty, and you are listening to Real Nerds Podcast.
Welcome to another Real Nerds Podcast interview from Denver Pop Culture Con 2019. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Denver Pop Culture Con Live 2019. We are with our most frequent guest officially now. This is your 7th time on the show. Does it feel like 7 times?
7 times? Has the show been going for 7?
We've been going for 8 years now.
Whoa.
And the only time we didn't have you was, I forget what year you weren't able to make it here.
Yeah, I don't remember the year.
But it was like 2 or maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Something like that, so yeah.
I thought it was only 5. That's so weird. The
Yeah.
show's been going on 7 years?
Yeah,
8 years.
8 years, yeah. So our first episode was X-Men First Class. And
Wow.
yeah, and we recorded our 400th episode early live. So, yeah, 400 consecutive weeks we've had a show.
Particular location? Or just...
Yeah, it's called the Bug Theater in Denver. It's like this little like local theater. It's pretty cool. So it's fun. So
And
welcome.
You just had a lot of people come out. I actually did that. Some podcasts a friend dragged me to. Everything You Should Know or something.
Mm-hmm.
So was what?
So like you know? Wow.
So no, Everything You Should Know or something. It's a podcast that give you information that you should know in your life. And they were doing a live tour, and yeah, they did, I'm assuming, pretty much the same like you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we had probably 25, 30 people there.
Oh. Well, they maybe had a little bit more.
Yeah,
but...
that's all right, you know. Our parents were there, so they're there to, at least we have some fans. But we're with artist extraordinaire, Jeanty. Welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks for coming back, as
Not
always.
at all. No, always a pleasure.
You know, I was thinking, too, you've been on the show so much, people might not know how you became an artist and your journey to become a comic book artist. Do you mind regaling us with that story?
I would. There's not much regale there, but I would love to. Just the history?
Yeah, how did you get started and where did the passion come from?
Well, you know, like I'm sure with most of you guys here, the passion's always been there. You just have a love for comics. You grow up reading comics. In my case, they really did. It's maybe a little overdramatic to say they changed my life, but that statement always comes into my head whenever anybody asks, you know, how did they affect you? And it really did. I remember certain times where you read a certain issue or how you felt about a certain issue, just like you might do with film. I can quote lines from certain issues. You know, it's a weird phenomenon because you don't really expect it from a 4-color medium. But yeah, that passion was always there and it never left, and obviously you realize after a while maybe I have a little talent, maybe I can do this professionally. And I just went through high school drawing and just again never really getting too far away from the comic medium. And after a while, you know, you get into college, maybe some people a little bit later, maybe I started thinking, well, what would I really need to do if I really wanted to do this for real? And I just did submissions. At that point, there was no internet still and no email or any of that stuff. So I actually had to come to shows like this and go to editors from comic companies and just show them my work and see what they thought. And there was a whole process when it was still very, what do they call it, hard copy, when it was all still very hard copy. You had to make copies of your samples, because if the editors liked it, then they'll ask for it and ask, hey, can you leave this with me, that sort of thing. So it was a very you had to carry around a lot of stuff. Nowadays, you take out your laptop, well, what's your email, or here's a link to my website, or this is my DeviantArt post, all that, which is great. But in my day, you had to carry the portfolio, and a lot of editors preferred to see the 11 by 17, so you had to carry those big portfolios with your samples and whatnot. And little by little, people liked what I did, and I won't say I was an overnight success by any means. I was an overnight 10-year success, more than likely. But after a while, you just kind of get to know people, and you really get comfortable, I thought, because I was so nervous with the first professional work I ever did, because you're questioning every little thing that you would otherwise go, that's my choices. Here, this. But when it's like I'm getting paid, or you're actually having to impress other people, ooh, man. Somebody once told me, I always wondered why, and as we all know, I'm full of tangents as we go on these podcasts, but I love acquiring information. And I always wondered why high school was such an important time in people's lives. Because really, it's only like 2-3 years, or 3-4 years. And you're like, oh my God, you lived your whole life. But for some reason, those 2-3 years are so important. Like, you remember people's names, you remember what you did, you remember where you were, you remember all these things. You can't remember 2 years ago, but you remember your high school years for the most part. And somebody was saying, well, because a lot of that time in our lives is because it's a series of firsts. And the series of firsts always seem to affect you a little more, because it's something that hadn't affected you before. So as it's affecting you, and high school is essentially a series, maybe your first time with a kiss, with sex, with driving, with, whatever, failing or succeeding, or all of that. And I thought, God, that's actually pretty true. And with art, that's how it felt with me when I was breaking in and trying to impress. All of those firsts really come and overwhelm you and me, that I remember breaking into this business very clearly over that 10-year period, because it was a series of firsts. And now I don't remember 10 years ago or what I was doing 10 years ago, but I can tell you the titles I was on when I first got comic work.
So who was the first editor who gave you a shot?
Actually, he became a friend. A company which is actually still around, strangely enough, Caliber Press. They used to be, well, they're still an independent company, but there used to be a huge crop, as I'm sure you know, huge crop of independent companies that were around, proliferating the 90s, and it was all just a big thing. And Caliber basically published non-superhero books, but they wanted to get into the superhero genre. And this was the 90s. This was the early Bad Girl stuff. Mm-hmm. And Caliber was like, all right, we'll give this superhero thing a shot. And they're based in Detroit. A guy there who was a letterer for them also was a writer, creator. And as soon as the guy was, what was his name? Gary Reed, who owned Caliber Press. And my friend, Brent Carpenter, he said, I've got all of this stuff, because he was just waiting for that opportunity to come. And Gary said, okay, let's do it. And so Brent then had to get people to actually fulfill these commitments now that he had it. And he just found me at a little show, a little one-day show he was doing down in Florida. And he said, I like your stuff. We can't pay you a whole lot. It'll be rough going, but if you're interested. And, of course, at that point, you're like, I don't care about money. I want to do it. Yeah. So from there, it just was an uphill climb.
And was it hard getting notes the first time from editors saying you need to work on this, you need to work on that, or did you welcome the criticism?
Well, with me, and I think I totally get what you mean. A lot of people just have this ego about what they do, and I can see it, because artists, more than any other medium, they basically give you something and say, here, judge it. And that is about ego. You don't really do that. You can't really do that with a writer because you actually have to sit and read the writing. With art, you can tell right away. You look at it 2 seconds. You collect art.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you tell 2 seconds whether you like it, whether it's good, how professional the guy is, because of the choices that he's made. And I think a lot of that with artists, they really can't separate the ego with the work. And early on, I was very cognizant of saying, I'm down here right now because I'm in the beginning of my career. This is something I'm just wanting to get to. I know at some point I'll be, and for you guys at home, I'm actually putting my hand up, saying I want to be up here, not down here. So I welcome criticism. I was like, yeah, tell me what's wrong. And a friend gave me great advice. He said, you'll learn more from the things that are wrong than you will from the things that are right. So not to invite somebody to just trash your stuff, of course, but really ask them, well, thank you for liking my work, but what are things that I can improve?
And I think that's important in all aspects of life. I think
sure.
Once you think you've reached pinnacle or you can't be taught anything, I think you're in trouble in real life.
Well, if that's the case, yeah, and you can't be taught and you're not experiencing and you're not learning anymore, I don't know that it's any fun anymore,
True.
Because a lot of what we do in all walks of life is the unknown. I mean, if you knew as a professional baseball player that every time you step to that plate you're going to hit a home run, would that really hold so much excitement for you every time you came to the bat?
I agree. I think, you constantly have to get better, and you have to constantly, because I've collected your stuff for so long, and I started going back and getting your older stuff, and I love seeing how you can change from book to book, though, because you did the final thing of Buffy.
Yeah.
And then you went into X-Men, and you can actually see a change. Not in, it's still recognizable as your art, but how it's laid out, and it just feels different, even though you're the same artist.
Yeah. Well, there's like with anything, like directors or people who do different types of medium, you sort of approach it with what's appropriate for that particular, in this case, story or genre. And Buffy and superheroes, while not that far apart, are very distinctly different, or at the very least I treated it very differently. I always treated Buffy with the idea that whoever is reading Buffy is probably a fan of the TV show and maybe not a big comic book fan, so they're sort of relegated to read Buffy. I have to make that transition as enticing as possible for them. Somebody reading X-Men or a superhero comic, they've probably been reading this their whole life. I don't have to adhere to that restriction when I'm doing a superhero book. So it's a very conscious effort, at least on my part.
And so how was it saying goodbye to Buffy? Officially goodbye to Buffy because, Joss did the last 4 parts, was involved. And now, it's been rebooted, but, that story is ended.
No, it was an ending, and it was... It's always that thing, and I'm sure everybody, whoever is behind a deadline, can tell you never really feel affected until it's actually over because you're so busy trying to get to the deadline and make the deadline and make sure there's nothing wrong and that it's actually completed. And then once it's completed, it's like all of a sudden, it's like you're running up this hill to get to the top of the mountain, and as soon as you get to the top, you forget to stop. But then you're looking around going, oh, I made it. All right, now I can reflect and take it in and do all that. And, it was really sad because, Buffy I started that in 2007. And off and on, I was back in and out of her life for 12 years or so. So it was pretty sad, I really have to say. And with Joss, too, because I knew in his mind, he knew it was leaving. We all knew that it was leaving. It was going somewhere else. So it there was an understanding that this is going to be an ending because, it's basically we have to pack everything and move to another city, essentially. And it was very much thought of as an ending. Not like, well, we'll just keep doing something over here instead of where we're doing it now. It was like, all right, let's definitely end this. And that's why, in a way, anyone who's read season 12, Joss kind of brought it full circle, including Frey, because that was his first comic book he ever did write for the 4-color medium.
And as a fan and knowing that it was ending, I had this weird feeling as I was reading issue 4, and I'm like, flipping it.
Yeah.
And as it gets smaller and smaller, I'm like, oh, this is really happening. Because I knew they were going to reboot it. I knew the franchise is too big for it to lay dormant.
Sure.
But you go on a journey for so long, and with you as the artist, and Rebecca Isaacs did a great job.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But when it came back to you, I don't know if it was Newsrama or IGN said it was a welcome return for you to be back on the book.
Right.
Not that you did a bad job, but it's just you're recognized as the Buffy artist, and that's got to be really cool too.
Well, and that was an interesting thing because, like we were talking about firsts at the beginning, nobody understood what a season 8 was, or taking a median topic and putting it into a comic book. If I'm not mistaken, Buffy was the first to do that and make it canon, like saying if you watch the TV show or the movie, you have to watch or you have to read the comic book now. And it was a series of firsts. Like, it was such a big thing. And I just happened to be the first guy to be there. And sure, people then remember that first that they were affected by. So it's always been very personal as a result. It's never just been, oh, yeah, that was that thing I did, for a couple of years. And it was okay. It's very to this day, I don't get tired talking about it. I don't get tired of people telling me the same thing, probably over and over. They always want to tell you their Buffy story, which is great, and I never tire of that. So it's been a great journey, but it's a journey that's I will assume will stick with me the rest of my life for sure.
Yeah, because even the Buffy series that you started, I mean, season 8 was so long, and it seems like everybody's just like, well, we're going to try this because we don't know how it's going to work out.
Exactly.
And then almost each season kind of got tighter and more focused. And, the only bummer I had, I wish season 12 was a little longer.
Oh, yeah. We all did. Yeah.
Because, I'm not saying it's poorly written or anything. No. It's just, I wanted more, and that's probably just the fan in me saying, not wanting to say goodbye to Buffy.
Yeah.
Because, I've read the Boom stuff, and it's actually really good. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I like the arc that Buffy went on.
Well, that was just it. The news that Buffy, the whole Whedon verse was leaving Dark Horse came about very suddenly. So they realized, you know what? We've got just enough time to do, if we're going to do it, we're going to do season 12, but we've just got enough time to do 4 issues. We really can't do 4 issues and a trade and still stay within our marketing, our merchandise contract. So by necessity, it became 4 issues. Because I'm right there with you. I was constantly telling everybody, you know what? So I don't mind doing another issue. I will burn the midnight oil if another issue will help. Or we can add a couple of more pages. It doesn't necessarily have to be 22, does it? We can add more pages. I'm totally cool with that. And they were like, no, this is all political now, and we really need to finish if we're going to do it.
And that's probably just a selfish fanboy in me. I'm like, I just want more of yours and Joss's story for Buffy. And,
I was the same way.
But, it's okay, though, too, because, sometimes things have to end, and it ended, and it was a great run. But then you branched into X-Men, which is really cool because seeing the Blob come kind of front and center is interesting. And how did that gig come about?
That just really, I was looking for work at that point, and the landscape, and I was talking about this with a few other professionals while I'm at the show. The landscape of comics has changed so drastically within the last 10 years. To me, it feels like a surprise, only because, and I realize this, I have become very complacent because I was working on a gig like Buffy or Serenity that was ongoing. It basically allowed me to get lazy, essentially. I realized that. So now that it ended, I realized, there's nobody calling, there's nobody saying anything, there's nobody offering me anything. I actually have to hit the pavement, which I haven't done in years. The great thing about comics was there was always something around the corner that, if you're working on this, an editor would say, oh, well, I've got this coming in about 4 months. If you're free, we can definitely do it. Yeah, that's great. And none of that was happening. So I actually had to cold call, well, not even call these days because you email, just people I'd never even met, too, because in that time that I became very lazy, people have gone, people have moved on, people aren't in the same position. So I had to reintroduce myself to a bunch of editors that I didn't know, and I'm assuming they didn't know me, and just ask for work and see, hey, is there something there? I went through DC, I went through Marvel, I talked at Dark Horse, and they were like, well, we love your stuff, but there's nothing at the moment. And through that whole rigmarole, Marvel was the first one to come up and say, well, we've got this 5 issue. if you're interested. And it started at a time where I was going to be available, and if you want it, it's yours. So it really became more about that than just, so-and-so was here, and I talked to that, and they gave me the job. I really had to pound the pavement, which is an expression you don't hear anymore.
And it's kind of a coming back to the X-Men fold because,
Yeah.
I can't remember the dates, but you did Bishop and Gambit and I guess Deadpool kind of considered
Deadpool,
X-Men.
yeah.
I guess
Weapon
now.
X type of a gig, so I guess.
That's got to be fun too after all these years.
It was full circle. Of course, I'm not drawing any of those characters.
Yeah,
in the
not
series.
this one, but it's a very specific story. But
Right, they're all in their other books.
Yeah.
But it was great to come back to these pseudo characters that I knew. But the irony there is, if you know the premise of the Extremists, it's a whole new revamp of a story idea where they're in a different alternate reality. So the characters were there, but their characters were different.
And that's the thing with X-Men is that I think the X-Men are maybe the hardest comics to follow because whether they have, I really like this book called Grand Design. I don't know if you've seen it. It's it's drawn like in the 60s style, and it has newsprint. It's really cool.
Oh, nice.
And they're about there are 80 pages, and they're $10 each, but they're really cool. But it's a different kind of like premise for the X-Men. And I think the X-Men are just so hard to follow. I mean, I know. I mean, Logan's been dead for a while, but he's back. But there's also Old Man Logan, and then there's
in the same universe.
Yeah, I can't even
at the same time.
Yeah, I can't keep.
Because I thought Old Man was obviously
so he's
some years in the future.
Some years in the future, but then they brought Logan back with heated claws. I don't know.
Heated claws?
Yeah. I forget how it works because
that?
I can't keep track of it.
Does he retract? Are they still hot when he retracts?
I don't know. I asked Charles Soule was the writer of it, and I had him on a panel, and he wouldn't really divulge because it was a secret.
Oh, sure. Because he didn't want anyone else to do it, I'm
yeah,
sure.
Exactly. Or he thought of the idea, and he's trying to think of how it works out. You have another thing going on. Before we get to that, are you excited for the new Godzilla movie? Because I know you're a huge Godzilla fan.
Yes, and that just shows you my dedication to the Denver Comic-Con.
Yes.
That I am here instead of sitting at a theater watching the weekend release of Godzilla.
Because you always post on Twitter and on Facebook your new Godzilla acquisitions.
Oh, yeah.
So what about Godzilla is cool to you?
It's again and really when we get down to it, and it's such a sad state.
It is
of us as men, because I'll assume our camaraderie extends primarily to the stuff that we loved as kids.
Oh yeah, no, I agree.
That's what it really comes. The cereal, the cartoon, the comic books, the movies, whatever it was you loved as a kid, you just didn't let it go. So now that you're grown up and you have some means and currency, you can feed that love that you had so many years ago that you couldn't do anything about then. But now, if you want a toy, you can. If you want a statue, if you want to own the movie, if you want to anything you can do now, you can do that with that sense of nostalgia. And I'm right there with you. I love the Godzilla movies. Godzilla was probably the first thing on television I ever remember actually watching. And I believe it was Godzilla versus King Kong, and it had to be, I don't know, maybe it was 4 or 5, but I remember distinctly sitting in front of the TV, my mind blown that Godzilla and King Kong could be in the same movie, you know, because that was like the biggest crossover when you think about it. And for a little 4 or 5 year old kid, you're like, oh my God, they're together and they're fighting.
Yep.
So it's just never left. It's touched me my whole life. Not in a weird way, but
that's so funny. My wife always shakes her head at me because, it's like a couple months ago I was at Best Buy, and I always just go there and peruse sometimes, and they had the DuckTales like complete run. It was like $17.
DVD?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I picked it up and I started watching DuckTales, and my wife was, seriously?
Yeah.
I said, hey, we need to go on adventures with Scrooge.
Right.
And I don't know what, but it's funny because I was just relating, like, as a kid, I'd go home and watch DuckTales. And then as soon as I saw that available for $17, 92 episodes of DuckTales, I had to get it.
Right, and you're like, stop judging me, woman, and go get me some Fruit Loops.
Yeah, and do it now. And then she threw stuff at me.
Right.
Even
I didn't sleep at home that night.
Yeah, I was out on the couch. There is Amazing Fantasy 15 is here for $5,000. And
wow,
like,
really? That's good.
Yeah, and I told her, I was like, I might get that. And she goes, really?
Really?
And I knew that really was not the kind of really that I should get it.
It's the really followed with the look.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
And I was like, maybe I'll just tell her it's a reprint.
Or you'll just tell her, well, it was $15,000,
Yeah,
but
I'm
I
like-
got it for $5,000.
I'm like, $5,000, that's pretty good. Because I can't afford the $130,000 version. The $5,000 isn't within reach.
I share your passion. I was briefly insane like that. I was at a show. Some guy was selling Fantastic Four #1 for $5,000.
Oh.
Or maybe it was $7,000, but it was in that area. And literally, I walked around that whole con, walking around going, okay, I can put some on this credit card. I can put some on that credit
Yep.
card. If I make at least $1,000 here, I can put this here and put that there. And I was literally insane with that fever for a little while.
Oh, yeah. And it never ends. It never ends. Because you actually got me in to Tomb of Dracula.
Did I? No,
Yeah.
seriously?
Yeah, because I was a big collector, of Satana and things like that, and I got the Vampire Tales and Dracula Lives, the magazines, and then you told me that you collected Tomb.
Yeah.
And so I started going back and picking up some Tomb, because those books are kind of expensive.
Now they are. Yeah,
Yeah.
they weren't a few years ago.
So I've been slowly filling in my run, and they're just really cool because you don't. It's really a book that the antagonist is the main character.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
He's never a protagonist.
no, never. And I mean, the covers are just so striking, and the art in the book, and it's written so well. Because, they never make apologies for who he is.
Well, and then the beauty of that is that it's a very big ensemble cast.
Yep.
Because if you just followed Dracula, that would get boring after a while.
Yeah.
It's all those other characters,
Yeah, 'cause
that make it amazingly interesting.
Yeah, because, they start introducing his son and his wife, and then, the Van Helsings. And,
Yeah.
so I'm missing, obviously the first appearance of Blade is kind of hard to find. #1 is popping up everywhere, but
Right.
it's still pretty expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a really cool book. So thank you.
And some
for
of
that.
it, and I agree, some of it feels very comic bookish.
Yeah.
But a lot of it feels very noir
Yeah.
horror, which are the classic stuff you love to read. And it's always, and thankfully, Gene Colan stayed on the book for the whole run.
Oh,
because
yeah.
that look essentially personified Tomb of Dracula. I can't think of Tomb of Dracula without thinking of Gene Colan.
Oh yeah, because it's rendered so well, and there's some books where he's just like stalking the streets,
Yeah.
You're like looking for people, and but they also did a great job writing his internal thoughts. I thought
Yeah.
it's a very interesting book, totally different than anything in the Silver Age.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I mean, I believe, and because I love Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's a great comic, but you read Dracula, so different, and it's almost like they were playing with house money anyways,
Yeah.
and they didn't care. They're like, well, in this one he's going to fight werewolves.
And the interesting thing is, for 75, 72 issues, while there was it was in the Marvel Universe, but you notice there weren't a whole lot of guest stars
No.
in his book, and him and others. There were one or two, sure, but his was I guess it was a premise that you did have Doctor Strange and the Silver Surfer.
Yeah,
and-
that's
and
actually
some
one of my
those
favorite
characters.
covers.
Yeah.
Is when Dracula's fighting Silver Surfer. I'm like, yep, this is amazing. This is maybe the most amazing cover I've ever seen.
But by and large, yeah, they basically sequestered him to his
Yeah.
own book and left it that way.
This was very cool. But I also want to mention you started a Kickstarter.
I did. That's
For a
right.
sketchbook.
Thank you. God, I would have forgotten that.
Yeah, and I've been doing before our interview, I did some research this morning, and with only 2 days, you've already got almost $3,000.
Yeah.
So that's pretty awesome.
And you guys probably know a little more than I about all this stuff. This is sort of my first foray into the Kickstarting universe, and really any of the media where that can be a sustainable income. And so I just wanted to kind of test the waters and see. And I thought, well, what would be interesting? Because I know a lot of people are kickstarting comic books or media stuff or stuff. I thought, well, what could we do that was pretty easy? And I've actually never done a sketchbook of my superhero work.
Yeah.
I've done sketchbooks on Serenity and Buffy, and those were experiments back in the day as well. But I realized I've never really done one of superhero work. So I thought when we were talking about doing a Kickstarter with my friend Tony Ellis and Mark Landry, we got together and said, well, what's the easiest thing we could do, and what could we get out with the least amount of time? And we thought a sketchbook would do it. So this, hopefully, if it opens the door and it's successful, all of the IP and independent stuff I've ever wanted to do, if it's possible, I'm going to try and do it through Kickstarter.
And I think you can, because sometimes when you look at Kickstarter, the backing stuff is not that great. But I mean, for years, for $100, you get an original sketch. I mean, come on. I mean, that's worth it in its own.
Is that what you? I didn't actually do the.
Pledges,
so I don't know what's available.
So so it's the lowest thing is you get like the digital version of it.
Oh, okay, yeah, but that's standard, right?
Yeah, standard. And then, but I think it's really cool that just for $100 you get an original sketch inside the book.
Okay.
And I guess my question is, are you going to consult with people with the original sketches, or are you just going to sketch stuff out?
I am going to have to. Yeah, I guess I didn't really realize that was one of the options. So yes.
And then, I mean, even one of the most the biggest one is you get your name in the book, the sketch, and an original comic book page of art. So
was that the more expensive one? God help me. Okay, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So it's pretty reasonable, and I think that's why it's being backed so much and so fast, because you are well known. I know you do a lot of cons, and so I think people really like your work. And you're right; they might not be familiar with your superhero stuff because you've done Buffy and Serenity for so long.
Yeah, and you always want to see, everyone keeps saying, oh, you should do this, you should do this. And you always want to see just how much weight you have in a certain situation. So in this media universe, I'm curious to see how far my name will take it. And a Kickstarter seemed the obvious choice, that if somebody is always saying, oh, I love your work, I'd love to support you, whenever you got something, let me know. So now that there's something, it's like, okay, well, let's see how true that is.
And so do you have ideas for original IPs that you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I've done that for years. Yeah, it's always been, but again, I've gotten very lazy working on Buffy and Serenity and all these things that were just coming at me, where I didn't have to go out and do my own thing, or because everybody kept saying, and in this day and age with comic books the way they are, everybody asks, what are you working on, and what's your IP, or what's your thing? Everybody has a thing these days. So I've always had one, but it's just something where I've said, well, I'm actually happy drawing Buffy, to be honest with you. I'm actually happy doing Batwoman. I really like what I'm doing right now. I don't feel the need to, again, and I think it's more ego to have that, no, I got to do my thing, and my thing, and it's only my thing, and leave it at that. So now, I guess with the landscape being very sparse for work, I'm going to try and do my thing.
And do you want your thing? Are you working? Do you want to be superheroes? Are you trying different things? I mean, you've done stuff like American Way, which I guess kind of superhero-ish, but more political and more story-driven, I guess.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I am always, and I've always felt I was very story-driven. So anything I do, to me, it's more not necessarily about the character, but about the story. So the things I have in mind are more conceptual, rather than, oh, I've got the idea for this Superman type character, and he does this, he's from another planet, all that, and that's great, but to me all that is backstory. I'm more interested in what the actual story is, and then when I've got that, it's like a wonderful puzzle you piece together, saying, well, I can do this, and then I can do this, and I can put this here and put that there. And if as it comes together, that story starts to tell you, you know what, this is a story about a superhero, then that's fine. Or if the story just says, hey, this is a story about just a girl trying to do the right thing, then that's fine too. And that's essentially how I approach my stuff anyway.
Are you going to be writing? Or do you have a desire to write?
I do, yeah. I think every artist who tells stories, because telling stories is a form of writing, I think every artist who does that is in some way a writer, whether they admit it or not. And, time has shown us, the John Burns of the world, the Frank Millers of the world, anybody who's done art first and then graduated to writing, more than not, Mike Mignola, they have done very, very well for themselves. And I was never surprised because, again, I thought an artist is a storyteller. And to me, probably some of the best storytellers are artists.
And I agree 100%. And I think that's why I love your art so much. Is I'm such a nerd, and why I like Sal Buscema so much. Is I will cover the word balloons and I'll follow the story.
Right.
And if I can follow the story, then I know that they're a great storyteller, not just an artist, but a storyteller.
And that's a good way to gauge anybody who's coming up that wants to do this sort of thing and wants to do comics and tell stories. That's a good way to gauge. Yes, words are very important, obviously. It's a marriage of the medium. But I've always, and I think somebody told me at the beginning, if you, in order to determine whether or not you're a good storyteller, you should be able to get the gist of what the story is just from the art alone. There may be other exposition and things you need as a written word, but you should be able to get the gist of what the story is if you're doing your job well.
And I think that's lost a lot, and I'm not going to throw my banner under the bus, but there's some artists.
No, you're right.
That when they do, let's say, a fight scene, and you can't really follow the action, your eyes are too busy. And a couple years ago, I bought a comic page from you, and it's one of my most favorite action scenes.
Oh, yeah?
And it's from Buffy, and she's fighting a bunch of lizard people. And you tell this story where she's like, the lizard people are looking at her, she looks at them, and then the middle panel is her just doing flips and kicks, and then she throws another one, and then the last panel is her just looking at him. And then I know in that you're telling a story that she can take these guys down.
Right.
You know, and it's one of my most favorite sequential moments because it's easy to follow.
Well, thank you.
There's an artist right now in Spider-Man that he's a fun artist, but sometimes I can't follow his action because he has too much going on, and Spider-Man changes
Really?
like, where he is on the page, and so it's hard to follow. But I think that's why I think your art is so great, is because you're great at the sequential action, and not only action, but the dialogue scenes, because Buffy had a lot of heavy dialogue.
Yeah. I think that's twofold, too. It's especially when it's a fight sequence. There's a process for telling a story, and then there's also a process for a fight sequence, which in itself tells a story, but essentially is there to serve a certain purpose. It's not necessarily part of the story. Obviously, Buffy has to fight these characters to overcome and then maybe walk through the wall or walk through a door. But that's not necessarily the story. She just has to get from point A to point B. I've always looked at fighting in comics as choreography, and God help me, I was so fortunate to be reading Daredevil, Frank Miller's Daredevil, at the time, because nobody did it better than he in terms of choreographing. He actually made me aware that that's what I'm looking at, and why I'm so impressed with this comic book is that he's actually choreographing his fight. He will bring in a character that's supposed to throw a punch in the next panel, in the previous panel, and he'll have, like you just said, Daredevil turning to his left, but then he's following through and keeping on, and what he's doing now is from the left side, and all those little subtleties that the human eye shouldn't really stop and take in, you understand on a subliminal level if you're doing your job right, because the natural flow, the choreography of a fight should be there. And like I said, I saw that in Frank Miller's stuff and adopted it from here on. I've never done a fight and not either thought of Frank Miller stuff or choreographed it in some way, even if it was just one or two panels.
And I think I think it's really important for people who want to get in the medium to know that, because you have to be able to follow the story, because I'm guessing when you get a script, it doesn't say Buffy does a flip, picks up this lizard demon by the tail and throws him.
Right.
It's
in some cases, if it's germane, like maybe if that's the case, what you just said, Buffy gets the lizard, and the lizard wraps his tail around her neck, and while he did that, he maybe inserted some venom into her neck that she's not aware of. So that's germane to the story, but essentially, yeah, and that's funny you mentioned that, because I think that was at a point when Joss and I first started doing Buffy, where he would actually write out the fight sequences because we didn't know each other. He was first doing it going, I don't really know who's getting this. And then after we understood each other and he knew that he was writing to me, like the next fight sequence, okay, Georges, we've done this before. This is what I want. You're good at what you do, so I'm just going to give you these. I want Buffy to start here, and she's going to end up here and have her fight this guy. But at the end of the page, this is where she should be, and that's it. And that, to me, was probably the best compliment you can give an artist, to say, I trust in what you do, and you know what you're doing.
That's awesome. And so for inspiration, do you just, besides Frank Miller and how people move and stuff, do you watch like action movies or kung fu movies?
Always, yeah. And then, but to that too, and the only big distinction though with watching film is that film is done from multiple camera angles, and with comics, you kind of, like you were saying, it gets really difficult to see the sequence unless you can follow it. So a lot of the times, it's almost as if you were, and you guys have done film, you have to use a steady cam and only one camera if you're going to follow this sequence, because when you're doing too many, it can get convoluted, especially in comics, when you can only pick one static image at a time. We don't have the benefit of thousands and thousands of panels. So we have to choose the most appropriate image to show the progression of how that fight is going. So that is always paramount in my mind, and very difficult. But yeah, I love a good fight scene, and if it is a good fight scene, that terminology applies just as well. I'm trying to think. I always thought that the first Matrix, was really good at that, because the Wachowskis really had a level where, well, and they were comic book fans, so I'm not surprised about where it came. But just off the top of my head, the sequence where Neo and Trinity go into the building when they're going to get Morpheus, and they bring all their guns and they have to fight everybody in the lobby. If you go back and watch that sequence, you'll realize it's actually very well choreographed, that they're only going to traverse maybe 15 feet. They have to get from here to here, but in doing so, they have to fight all of these characters, or shoot them and kill them or whatever. But you'll notice a series of choreography, even more so that when the scene ends, it ends where Neo and Trinity were standing originally, and to sort of accentuate that, a piece of the wall comes off and falls while they're walking away. And to me, I looked at that as a storytelling device to say, this is where we started. And that's they only had to go about 15 feet, but that's how long it took them, and that's all the shit they did just to get to that 15 feet, and they kept walking into the elevator then.
No, I 100% agree, and that's why I think you'll be super successful in whatever you do, because you're such a great storyteller.
I hope, man, like I said, it's a different playing field. It's not, and sadly, this is true of anything. Sometimes it's not about how good you are. It's how lucky you are. It's you're in the right place at the right time. But being good sometimes is not enough.
And you have a great name, and people know you.
Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah. So for the Kickstarter, how can we find you on Kickstarter?
Yes, it is going on right now. It'll be going on until the end of June. It's at my. I think, God, I really should have
it's
this
your name.
information. Yeah, it's I think it's Kaba Lounge.
Yeah,
KABALOUNG.com. If you go to the website, it's there. But on the Kickstarter, I believe it's Kaba Lounge and then Georges Jeanty, or you can type in those two names and hopefully it'll come up.
I've never asked, where did the name for your website come from?
Oh, you want to talk about stupid kid stuff. Kaba Lounge, I don't have the ego. Because everyone, and this is how old I am, everybody back in the day was saying, oh, you got to have your own website. It was very important back in the day that you had. Now, of course, you have to have your own Facebook site, but it was very important you had to have your own website. And I thought, okay, and every website I saw, which rightly so, said the art of Tony Harris, the art of Adam Hughes, the art of whomever. And I thought, God, I just don't have, not to say they have the ego, but my ego wouldn't allow me to go the art of Georges Jeanty. That just felt so trite. I don't mind it being in the byline, but I was like, no, I don't want that to be the first thing. And I thought, I'm kind of hip. I'm kind of cool. I love going to clubs. It's more of a lounge type atmosphere. I want people when they come to my website. So I thought, lounge. Okay, well, that's part of it. But what? What do you call it? Georges Lounge? Lounge Georges or Club Georges? Or then I'm going, well, wait, maybe I'm getting a little too far away from what I'm trying to say, that this is an art site. And I thought I don't know why, I love hippopotamuses because they're such docile creatures and so great and graceful. Even there's such a juxtaposition. You look at them and you don't think how beautiful they are, how graceful they can be. And I've always seen that. And somebody once told me, I think I read in a book once, that hippopotamuses were the only animal, or that in recent years, and I mean hundreds of thousands of years, where all life evolved in the sea and then moved on land is our history. And as that has happened, most of us have stayed on land. And somebody once said, well, hippopotamuses were that too. And, the elephants are related and the sea lions and whatever. But the hippopotamuses got it in their head thinking, you know what, land, that's not where it's at. I want to go back in the water because I can just float and swim and eat and do all that. Everything is there. And I thought, what a cool concept that they thought they came here, said, no, this isn't the new thing. The thing is actually being back in water. And I thought, okay, I love that representation. So I've always kind of used a hippopotamus as a mascot. But I could never go hippopotamus lounge. Man, that has one too many syllables and just does not sound cool at all. Then I started looking for translations, and Kaba is Japanese for hippo.
Oh.
So I thought, Kaba Lounge, or Lounge Kaba.
All right.
That actually has enough alliteration that I'm going, okay, I didn't There's to a very boring story.
No, that is awesome. That was awesome.
That's how it came about.
Well, as always, thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you. I totally love you guys. And every time I come to Denver, I look forward to Real Nerds.
Oh,
because you guys
hey,
are so
thanks.
cool.
We look forward to talking to you because you're such a great guy. So thanks for being on, as always, Georges.
Thank you for having me.
Such a great guy. Bye.
Bye.
This has been another Real Nerds Podcast interview from Denver Pop Culture Con 2019. See you next year.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Real Nerds Podcast. Real Nerds Podcast is a production of Nebulous Visions Multimedia. Thank you to Sparks Mandrill and Plan 9 Studios for our kick-ass theme song. Also, if you're in the Denver area and you're looking for a cool place to see movies, we see them at the Alamo Draft House in Littleton and now also in Sloan's Lake. Thank you to Colorado Coins, Cards, and Comics for supplying us with all our comic needs, especially you, Andrew. You know who you are. And a big shout out to James's mom. I'm giving you an electronic hug that you can feel through the airwaves. Thanks for listening, and have a nice day.